Is this loud enough? Can people hear me? It might be too quiet. If this needs to be, the volume needs to be turned up, just let me know, signal to it. Oh, they're doing it as I speak, so thank you so much. Hi everybody, my name is Justin Harris, and I'm the Community and Intergovernmental Engagement Section Manager, that's a mouthful, for ADEQ. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm gonna be facilitating tonight, and just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I've done a lot of work up here in Northern Arizona. I've worked with the Division of Developmental Disabilities, training officers throughout the state of Arizona on how to work with folks who have autism. I've actually done trainings up here at Spectrum in Cottonwood, and more recently I worked for one of the Access Health Plans, have done community health fairs in your community over at Manzanita Outreach, so very excited to be with you here tonight. We are here from ADEQ. I'm going to move around a bit, I hope that's okay, I get a little jittery, but we're here from ADEQ because we want to listen more to communities. And so that's our goal tonight, is to be here and to listen to you. So there are some things that I wanted to kind of get through before we do that. We are going to have a presentation here tonight on air quality. So let me just kind of read a little bit of information to you here. I'm going to be facilitating the conversation this evening with assistance from Lauren Hildebrand. Some of you may know her. She actually is our community liaison for this area, and so we're glad to have her here tonight. We'd also like to welcome and thank those who are online with us for participation. This meeting is being transmitted through Zoom, and let me see here. So we're here to listen to you tonight as a community. Thank you all for attending. I wanted to go over our stated purpose tonight from ADEQ, and that purpose is to engage with the community to provide updates and discuss concerns about minerals.
Recording in progress.
Okay, now it's going. Now it's being recorded, so everybody be on your best behavior, right? So to engage with the community to provide updates and discuss concerns about Minerals Research Inc. and the slag pile operation at Birch and Cherry Streets in Cottonwood. We would like to acknowledge some of the elected officials that are here in the room. I don't know if you want to stand, you don't have to, but I think people might know who you are. Councilwoman Curat, Councilmember Palisari, Planning and Zoning Commissioner Duvernay and Kling, and so thank you all for being here tonight. Just some ideas that we'd like to go over. I'm going to just come back here and put this down just to the side here. So we wanted to go over tips for a good meeting tonight, and just some ideas of ways that we think we can get to a good point in this conversation. Those tips are to share from your experience and perspective. We want to hear your experience and your perspectives. Please listen when others are speaking. We would ask that. Allow space for all to participate, and what that means is speak briefly, be focused, and on topic. So thank you for that. And then be generous. We at ADEQ want to be open to the community and to the community's input, and we ask that you remain open to us also. We ask that all present try to be respectful and kind, and we believe that this will lead to good outcomes. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn over a little bit of time to Lauren at this point for some housekeeping. Lauren?
Thank you again to everyone for coming tonight. We're so happy that everyone's here, and thank you to everyone that's joining via Zoom. We appreciate you guys attending. And so I just wanted to go quickly over some housekeeping items. So restrooms are here to everybody's left that's sitting in the audience here today, and there's also a water fountain and some cups, as well as some breath mints. So help yourselves to those. And we have 2 tables here with some handouts. There's one in the back of the room and one also by the restrooms. There are copies of the agendas back there, as well as some comment cards. So if you guys aren't comfortable asking any questions during the question and answer portion of the meeting, feel free to fill out a comment card and place them in the box by the table but near the restrooms. And we will get those scanned and hopefully be able to answer your questions in the next few weeks and send you the answers via email. There's also some business cards for some of our faculty that will be speaking today. There's a sign-in sheet back there as well. If you could please sign in and put your email address and check the box if you would like to be subscribed to public notices for Yavapai County. There's also a separate sign-in sheet if you would wish to speak today during the question and answer portion. So if you think you may have a question, feel free to sign your name up back there because we will try and call on as many people as we can during this meeting. But we do have a lot of people here and we are ending at 8, so we'll try and call everyone in the order that you sign up and ask a 1 to 2 sentence question about the presentation or just anything related to ADEQ, and we'll be happy to answer that. And there's also some fact sheets with just some common questions that we've received over this year about the facility that we tried to answer there, as well as some QR codes to additional information. And there's also a historical records binder by the restroom table. And there's also a QR code if you would like to have those documents for yourself. So feel free to take a picture of that or scan that on your phone and review them at your leisure. And there's also copies of the consent order that Mineral Research Inc. has currently. So if you would like to grab one of those, feel free to take those home with you. And then so we will also, on the agenda for our virtual attendees and our attendees here in person, there is a QR code link as well as a link to a virtual comment portal. So if you wanted to leave your question, maybe you forgot to ask it today, the link will be open until Friday evening at 5 o'clock. So if you guys want to leave any questions or comments, feel free to do that virtually as well, and especially for our Zoom viewers. And then, yes, please sign up to speak, and we'll call on as many as possible. And I think that's it. I do not, but maybe this city has the Wi-Fi.
We'll see if we can get it.
Yeah, we'll try and grab that for you, Jen.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. We didn't consider Wi-Fi. Cardinal sin, right? Everybody needs the Wi-Fi. Great. Thank you for doing that, Jen. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate you doing that. So I wanted to do some ADEQ introductions here. We have about 10 or 11 folks that have come up from the Valley to participate. Some of them have actually come from Sholo area. Lauren came from Parker area, right? So I'll go ahead and introduce them now. So we have Heather Krause, who is our Air Quality Division Deputy Assistant Director. Her title is almost as long as mine. You can go back if you want to stand up here. You guys can all stand up here. Yeah, that's right. And then Balaji Vaidyanathan is here with us, and he's going to be presenting to us in just a moment. Thank you so much, Balaji. We also have David Kim here, who is a groundwater reuse section manager, and David was with Air Quality until about a month or two ago. Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you, David. And then we have Jean Ziga. Did I say your name right, Jean? Ziga. Okay, Ziga. I'll get that right in the future. She's a compliance unit case manager. We also have Craig Pearson here. Craig. And Craig is an air quality assurance manager. And then Rob Verville. And Rob is an air quality inspector. We also have Caroline Oppelman. Caroline, she's back here. So she's our Director of Communications and has been coordinating with the city on media responses and those types of things. We have Eddie Slade here. Eddie. Eddie is our Administrative Counsel for ADEQ. Thank you for coming, Eddie. And then last but definitely not least, Melissa Hayes. Melissa, where are you? She's in the back. She's been greeting people. Melissa is our Community Engagement Planner as of, about a month ago, and she keeps me on track, so I really appreciate her a lot. So thank you, Melissa. All right, so we wanted to make a few comments just for the city and do some intros. We'd like to acknowledge the city of Cottonwood and their collaboration and thank them for facilitating this location. Thank you so much. We want to inform the public that the city recognizes this community concern and will be holding future opportunities to engage the public on this topic. Some of the folks that are here with us tonight from the city manager Scotty Douglas, members of the police department and fire department. Oh, Scotty. He's helping with the Zoom. Thank you, Scotty, for doing that. And we have members of the police department and fire department, as well as community development and other department heads. So on our agenda, I've kind of gotten into it a little bit here. I knew I'd have to do a little bit of juggling at this point. We've already gone through housekeeping. Do we have a Wi-Fi?
There's a guest.
There is a guest. Okay, so just use the guest. It's working? Okay, thank you, Jen. So we've done the housekeeping, we've done introductions. We are going to have a presentation here soon on air quality permitting, compliance and monitoring from Balaji, as I said. And this panel of folks from air quality are going to be helping out with answering some of our questions when we have the question and answer session. And that's going to be after the presentation. I'll be conducting that. And then we're going to have some closing remarks from Heather Krause. Let me get back to the right page here. So we need to review, oh, I'm sorry, I've done that already. Let me inform you first that our end time is at 8 p.m. this evening. However, we anticipate that some of the ADEQ representatives that are here will be around afterwards to have brief conversations with you. So, and if you have questions, as Lauren said, and you don't want to get up and be in front of a lot of people, some people aren't comfortable with that. As Lauren said, we do have those comment cards. Feel free to avail yourselves of using those. Okay, so we're going to get into the presentation portion of the community meeting tonight. Did want to clarify that this is a community meeting and not a public hearing, just so that people understand that. And I'm just going to do a short bio for Balaji here. Balaji is the manager of air permitting and compliance programs for ADEQ. He's been with ADEQ for 25 years and has managed air quality programs for almost 20 years. He has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a master's degree in industrial management. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Balaji. We would ask that you hold your questions until he's done, and then we will have that question and answer period.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Lauren. My name is Balaji Vaidyanathan, and I manage the permitting and compliance program for ADEQ. And what I intend to do today is to provide you an overview on air quality as it relates to the MRI operations. And I'll go through this in about 15 to 20 slides, and we'll open up for questions after that. High level, in terms of what I want to present on, are three different topics. What are ADEQ's plans for air monitoring moving forward? That's a big topic that's of interest to all of you, so we'll touch on that. I'm going to summarize MRI's recent permitting and compliance history. Also, I'll provide an overview on what to expect in the air quality permitting process. That is still an ongoing process, but I would like you to understand the steps involved. So right off the bat, I want to talk about where we are with respect to air monitoring. You know, over the last several weeks and possibly months, we have received a lot of comments, a lot of concerns and complaints about what is in the slag dust that comes off the property. And there is obviously concern about toxins in the air and heavy metal exposure to the people who live nearby. And so ADEQ has heard all these comments, and we are making a commitment to do air sampling. So we already have a lot of wheels moving with respect to our ambient monitoring plants. And we have already chosen locations. So I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail in the slides to come. But I just want to start off on that note as our most recent work on this topic. Real quick, with respect to what MRI does, and this may be something that all of you know already, what the company does is to process historical copper smelter slag that's been around for possibly 100 years now. And they process it to produce multiple different commercial products. A couple of them that come to mind are abrasive blasting media and also pavement aggregate products. So those are two big things that they do. In terms of high-level process, it all starts with some level of blasting. The slag pile is extremely crystallized, so you got to break it up a little. So they do some blasting out there. It's not an everyday kind of activity, as you may know. It happens periodically. And once they blast, they take what has been broken up onto a separate operation where they do some primary crushing. They take the bigger slag pieces and make them into smaller chunks, and then you stockpile them, and then you take it on to what is called a secondary crushing circuit, where you do even more crushing to get the bigger size slag pieces to possibly coarse, medium, and fine material. And that's what is eventually sold as commercial product. But once you do the secondary crushing, They go through a drying process because there is some moisture in the material because of the air pollution controls that are being applied. And once you get through the drying process, essentially you have to size it. They size it, and depending on the size that they screen for, they can use it for different commercial products. And the end of it all, they do product storage, and they do bagging, and they ship it off-site. That's the overall process. So right in here is a permitting timeline, and this goes back in time because we want to own some of the stuff that's happened around the MRI permitting over several years now, right? So initially, the company made contact with us back in September 2009. They requested for a determination from DEQ if their operations needed a permit. Shortly after they applied for this, maybe 3 months later, in December 2009, we made an official decision and sent a notice back to the company indicating that the company's operations and the associated emissions are not high enough to warrant a permit. Obviously, in hindsight, it was a mistake, and we own it. We did it wrong, and we got to hopefully move it forward and make it right. Subsequently, MRI commenced operations in 2015, and since that point, we have done a few inspections. Sometime in July of 2018, we communicated with the company that they had to go get a permit, and we directed them to get what is called a crushing and screening general permit. And a general permit, for people who may not be familiar, is a concept where we do a permit for a broad category of sources, like crushing and screening operations, a broad one. And then once you do a permit, any permittee who's got an operation that fits the model can apply for a permit underneath it. And that's what we advise them to do. Again, in hindsight, and I'll own this again, we gave guidance on this matter that in hindsight is incorrect because this facility processes metallic mineral in the slag. And by the very definition of how the general permit is set up, this would not be a material that is covered by the permit. So we did that twice, fully conceding that. And since then, we've done multiple inspections. And in September of this year, a few months ago, is when we put the company on notice that they have the wrong permit. And with respect to permitting, the most recent update is the fact that they've applied for a permit on October 31st. So in this slide, I want to provide some context on their inspection and compliance history. So you will see two different columns. You will see a time frame from 2015 to 2022. That's kind of more of the historical stuff. And then you see something for 2023, this year. So over the course of time, since MRI commenced operations, we've been out there multiple times, 10 different times. And at least the first 7 years, we never cited them. When I say citation, meaning that any non-compliance finding and issuing them a notice, none of that stuff happened. However, in 2023, we have done 7 different inspections, and we have cited the company 3 different times. And down below on the slide, you will see kind of a breakdown. Our first notice was back in June of this year, and it was for leaks from process equipment. And what that means is when you have a leak, you create the potential for dust leaving the property. So we cited them, and they returned to compliance maybe a month later. And you'll notice the words NOC listed after the date. And what that means is it is a notice of opportunity to correct. And what that means in our system is it's a lower level infraction that we work with the company to remedy. But when you see the next 2 violations, they would be cited as NOVs. Those are notices of violation. And that is a higher level violation in our books. So we handle them differently in how we process them. So the second violation in August was for them having some spray bars which are not working. This is a pollution control concept. Also, some leaks that we identified, and general, overall site housekeeping practices. So they worked on this fairly quickly and got back into compliance within 4 days of the notice from ADEQ. And lastly, and perhaps the most significant one, is the one from September, where we notified them that they had the incorrect permit and they had to work with us to get the right permit. And this is where I kind of segue on to a different topic, which is the consent order. So as of now, the company does not have a permit from DEQ, but they are on a pathway to get a permit. But in the meantime, they're working under the legal cover of a consent order. And that's what I'm going to explain in the next few slides. So from a consent order timeline, first of all, I want to mention what a consent order is. It's essentially, in this situation, a legally binding agreement between the company and ADEQ for the company to do and fulfill a few environmental obligations and essentially put them on a pathway to eventually get a permit. So, like I said, the NOV got issued back in September of this year. Subsequently, in early October, after discussions with ADEQ, the company voluntarily agreed to shut down their operations. And for the next week, they worked very closely with us, and we processed this legally binding consent order. And once that consent order was issued on the 12th of October, the following days when the company kind of restarted their operations. And also, in line with what the consent order prescribed, the company applied for the right permit. It's called an individual permit. They applied for it on October 31st. So this is one question that has come up repeatedly, and I want to kind of tackle it proactively, is why did ADEQ allow MRI to operate under a consent order? And this is a very important concept for us, and we hopefully can get on the same page on this. The consent order is not a substitute for a permit. It does not eliminate the need for a permit. However, it provides a temporary legal mechanism for the company to continue operations till they obtain the permit. That is the whole concept. And for the consent order to be active and give them cover, they got to fulfill two provisions. One of them is they go through the right process to obtain a permit, which is what they're currently doing. And secondly, from the time of issuance of the consent order till the permit is obtained, they got to keep complying with all the terms of the consent order. And for that, we do routine inspections. We also have them submit monthly reports to us, and those are our ongoing processes to verify compliance. And also, a couple of concepts we kind of kept in mind when we worked on the short-term consent order concept is that along the whole way, the company has worked with us in good faith in terms of trying to ask us for a permitting determination back in 2009, and subsequently heeding our advice on going and obtaining a general permit. So that is part of our thought process. And secondly, and this is by far the most important consideration, when we do the consent order, it's not a transactional piece of paper. It's not just bureaucratic. There's a lot of technical work that goes into it. And one of the key technical elements in a consent order process is what we call air dispersion modeling. I'll explain the whole concept in the next few slides. But the whole premise is when we do modeling, we are able to come up with the documentation and evidence that the facility can comply with applicable federal standards. And only if that happens do we have the necessary comfort in our minds to be able to process a consent order. So we'll talk about this concept a little bit more. But with respect to what the consent order contains, this is the high-level concepts. One, obviously, we performed air dispersion modeling, which I'll talk about a bit more, to show compliance with what is called the NAAQS. It's the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are set by EPA for protection of public health. And then it puts them on a clock to go ahead and apply for a permit, which they've fulfilled. And other terms that are relevant is the consent order contains some emission limit concepts. And when we talk about emission limits, it means that if you have a certain stack, you cannot put out more than a certain pound per hour of emissions from that stack. And the way we verify it is not just trusting their word for it, but by making them do independent testing. So the company is required to hire a third-party company to do testing, and they follow EPA protocols, and these tests are approved by DEQ. We sometimes have inspectors out there observing the test, and then the test results are used to compare against the limit. So that is a big part of the consent order. Other things, we want to be able to improve housekeeping concepts within the facility. We want to improve dust control as a general concept within the facility. So we have some very rigorous daily obligations for inspection of equipment and also for looking at emissions that are coming off the stacks. They got to do that on an everyday basis and compile reports for us. Additionally, there is a robust dust control plan that prescribes how they need to go about minimizing dust in every aspect of their operation. So this is what makes the consent order, in our understanding, it makes it a defensible alternative in a short-term basis for the ultimate air quality permit. So I've talked about this whole federal standard. I've mentioned the acronym NAAQS, National Indian Air Quality Standards, but I want to talk about it a bit more to maybe give it a more practical flavor. The three pollutants that are of concern from a federal standpoint as it applies to this facility are PM10, and what the 10 means is the particle size is 10 microns and lower. And then there's something called PM2.5, and 2.5 again is the size of the particle. And last but not the least is lead. And right below, you will see an image that we put out just so that you have some concept around the microgram size. When you think about the human hair, the average diameter of the human hair is somewhere between 50 to 70 microns. And when we talk about this PM10 and 2.5, we're talking about particles that are a fraction of the human hair. So it probably provides puts in context for you what we're talking about here, because this can get through your nasal passages, deposit in your lungs, and lead to possibly respiratory issues. So that's why we address it and EPA addresses it in the federal program, because these two are very important pollutants. And lead, of course, is considered to be a carcinogen. On top of it, it's a neurotoxin. So the health impacts from lead can be very, very significant. So these are three primary pollutants that we are dialed in on as part of the consent order, and we'll be dialed in on as part of the permitting process long term. So I mentioned the word dispersion modeling, and again, I don't want to get into too much of the technical details, but dispersion modeling is actually an EPA mathematical simulation model where we are able to put in a bunch of different inputs and be able to get a result. So in the case of air dispersion modeling as it applies to this facility, the inputs would be whatever emissions is coming off the MRI facility. We would take local meteorological conditions, for example, wind speed and wind direction, that will dictate how the plume will move from the property. And then also topographical considerations around the facility. These are all inputs into the model, and when the model is run through an EPA algorithm, it spits out a result, and that result is the modeled concentration of the pollutant of concern coming from the property. And we take that modeled concentration, and on top of it, we overlay what is called a background. And what a background means is what is inherent to the airshed, the area, without the MRI facility. So the whole principle is you take a reasonable background, and then you overlay the facility's impacts on top of it, and in combination, those impacts cannot exceed the federal standards. That's the principle. So right in this slide, we present a summary of the modeling results. On the left, we show a plot plan of the facility, and you see the yellow line, the solid line around the facility. That's what is called the property boundary. And this is very important from an ADEQ context, because ADEQ's jurisdiction applies to what we call ambient air. And ambient air is what is available for people outside the facility's boundary. So whatever happens within the facility itself, with respect to emissions, they're all subject to occupational exposure standards for the workers. When we talk about residential exposure or community exposure, we talk about what happens beyond the boundary. So when you see the table on the right, you will see that we tackled three different pollutants, PM10, PM2.5, and lead. And you will see the federal standard in a column, in the second column, and then you will see the actual result that we got from the model. And you'll notice in every one of these instances, we essentially modeled the facility for compliance. And that is a fundamental principle for us to work around if you want to give anybody either a permit or even a consent order. So this kind of segues for me to another closely related topic, and this is a topic of significant concern for a lot of you. What about the metals coming off of the property, right? And that's a big thing. And obviously, you know, with what they process, the concept that the dust from the facility will have some heavy metals in it, like arsenic, lead, manganese, that is a given. There's no question about that. However, there's two other things that we all have to keep in mind when we explain ADEQ's authority on this. One of them is, EPA has certainly classified these heavy metals to be what they call hazardous air pollutants, and it's a legal term under the EPA program, but they do not have specific ambient concentration criteria for this that we can use directly in a permitting application. And that is a key concept. So when I talked about PM10, PM2.5, and lead, they have direct standards that the facility has to comply with. But when we talk about these heavy metals, there is no such comparable standard that we can work with. So that's concept number one. The other thing is, when we evaluate a facility's emissions, there is also a mass concept. How many tons of emissions is this facility putting out? And that's what dictates to us what kind of permit they need to be getting from us. This facility, according to the facility's emissions calculations and what we verified, they emit these heavy metal emissions at a level of about 0.004 tons per year. Okay, and a ton is about 2,000 pounds for reference. So that's 0.004 tons per year.
That's how much dust they put out.
Not dust, the heavy metals, like the combination of arsenic, lead, manganese, and things like that. So there is a different number, Jen, which is the PM10 number. The PM10 is the dust number, but the heavy metals are a fraction of it.
It's
0.004 tons per year, and a ton is 7,000 pounds. It was like 2,000 pounds. I'm so sorry. 2,000, sorry. Yeah? So the concept here is if their emissions are at this level of 0.004 tons per year, they are what we would categorize to be a minor source of emissions. And what is interesting about that from a toxic standpoint is when you are a minor source, the federal program does not kick in, meaning that we can't apply any federal rule for toxics control for this situation, and we are also prohibited from writing a specific standard under what is called the EPA National Emission Standard Program. So that is the interesting issue here. Whatever benefits and control that we get for heavy metals comes by collateral benefit, which is very, very true, because when you control PM10, which is dust, indirectly you're controlling the heavy metals. That is the concept. But what I'm trying to say is legally, I don't have authority to write specific heavy metal conditions into their permit. So from that point, I want to kind of transition and talk about where we are and what we expect to happen through the permitting process. The first step in the process is obviously getting the application, which we have done. And the next significant milestone for us is getting through a lot of our internal review process. And essentially that involves us looking at calculations, figuring out what kind of emissions they have, the dispersion modeling that I talked about, right? So we did that in the context of the consent order, and we are doing it again in the context of the air permit. And then we have to research comprehensively what rules apply to the facility. And when all of that happens is when we start writing the actual permit. The permit contains a lot of different concepts. It requires them to meet some emission limits. It requires them to keep a lot of records and show them to us. It requires them to do some monitoring work on their own and submit reports to us. And also testing. They need to bring in a testing company on a periodic basis and test the stacks out to make sure that the emissions are truly where they need to be. So that's how a permit is built. And then along with the permit, we also write a concept called a technical support document. It's more of a plain English version of the permit, and it's supposed to help people like you to read the permit and kind of understand where ADEQ is coming from, both from a legal authority standpoint and also from a technical feasibility standpoint in defining those conditions. That's how the permit process goes. And once we have that is when we open it up for the overall community engagement process, which is a very, very important process for us, because for a permit to be purposeful for all of you and for the company and for DEQ, we need to get your buy-in, and we need you to be able to look at the permit and provide us input. So what we will do during the public comment process is to open it up for at least 30 days at a minimum for public comment. And all of our permit documents, the permit, the technical support document will be made available either electronically or in paper format if you so wish. And you can review them, and maybe within a couple of weeks of the public comment period starting, we'll be out here again. So I will again do a presentation on how the permit is built. And again, we will do a very informal Q&A session for you to ask us questions regarding the permit. And once that is wrapped up, we will come back again maybe a couple of weeks later and do a more formal public hearing. The hearing is different from a community meeting from the standpoint that it is an official venue for you to give us feedback. You can give us feedback by email. You can give us feedback by snail mail. You can talk to us in the hearing itself, because we will record every single comment that is made. And once that is all obtained, we have a legal obligation as an agency to go back and respond to every single comment substantively. And only when we are done with the process can we take the final decision on the permit application. So it's a fairly lengthy process that could span multiple months. So there's a good chance that we'll be in front of you sometime in the summer of next year for that. So moving on, I want to go back to the first slide that I put up with respect to our commitment to do air sampling. I want to talk about it a bit more because we tried to be as responsive as we could be, right? We heard a lot of concerns around the children's park, a lot of kids playing, ingestion exposure, inhalation exposure. So we want to measure out there. So we already have an agreement with the city of Cottonwood to be able to use some space right by the park and to do some monitoring. In a few weeks, we'll be mobilizing a fairly big-sized trailer, and we'll set up our equipment out there. And the same thing goes for the VFW site, which is just north of the facility. And we are very close to having an agreement with them. As we speak, it may be happening right about now. It's actually done, I believe. So we have agreement at both sites to be able to do air monitoring. So what we will measure for at both sites is PM10 and also heavy metals. So the way it's done is, I'll show it in the next slide, is we collect the air samples. The equipment will be out there, and we will have to come in and replace the filters on the equipment periodically. And the collected filters are what is shipped off to a state-certified lab. So it's an independent party. It's not being monitored by either ADEQ or MRI. It's being done by a third party. And they would, analyze the data and give us a report. And that report will be consumed by us in two different ways. One of them is for PM10, like I explained before, we have complete legal authority over what happens with PM10. So that data will be directly consumed by ADEQ to instruct us with any decision making. But when we talk about heavy metals, based on how I explain legal authority and our minimal ability to influence those concepts, that data, along with local phenomena like wind speeds, wind direction, operating information from MRI for that window of time, will all be supplied to DHS, and DHS will work on what we call a health consultation for us. And once that process is concluded is when I think we are expecting to be able to share the results with all of you. So that's the plan. The hope is we are able to kick off the monitoring over the next several weeks and hopefully be up and running by the beginning of the new year. That's the plan for us right now. That essentially brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope it was instructive in understanding our thought process, where we stand currently with permitting and compliance, and also provides you some insights about what we intend to do from an air sampling standpoint. I do have some information here. Any questions that you may have, obviously if you have questions right now, we can take it. But if you have questions in the future, you're absolutely able to work with Lauren Hildenbrand now, and she's the community liaison for this area, and she can be the point person. But obviously, if the questions are technical, she's going to kind of rope me in, and I'll be able to respond to all of you. And aside from that, we do have a QR code. You can scan it, and you can also put comments in through a link from there. And those kinds of comments will be responded to by us within the next several weeks. That's the plan. So that's my presentation. Justin?
I'm here.
Back to you, sir. Yeah.
All right. Yes, please use that smart comment feature with the QR code. That's running for the next 48 hours. Is that right, Lauren?
Yeah, it'll be open until Friday, December 15th at 5 p.m. But if you have a question after that, feel free to just send me an email.
Excellent. All right, so we are going to go now for about the next hour and 10 minutes. Our time that we're ending here is at 8 p.m. We do project that there will be some of our representatives that will be kind of lagging behind after that to have conversations if you wish to do so. But we'd like to start the question and answer portion of the meeting now. Just a few things that I wanted to share with you for a little bit of level setting. We would prefer that you keep your comments to questions or comments, I apologize, to questions about Balaji's presentation or comments that have to do with the slag heap specifically. And also, if a previous speaker has asked a question, we would like to go on to a different question only because having the same question asked multiple times isn't going to give that question more validity. We really want to hear from you, so we want to hear what the concerns are of the community and have that from you. Also, some of the questions you may have tonight may have to do with health issues. We are not medical professionals, and so we won't be able to answer those questions specifically. However, Melissa is at the back of the room, and she'll be writing down each of the questions. So if there are health-related questions, we will pass those along to Arizona Department of Health Services so that we can find out more information about that. Also, we are asking that you keep your question to 3 minutes maximum. If you don't want to take that full time, that's fine, but we'd like to keep it to the max of 3 minutes because we have a lot of people here. We want to get through as many people as possible before 8 p.m. Actually, we'll be closing up probably about 5 to 10 minutes before 8 so that we can do some closing remarks. And we'll be giving a friendly reminder on that 3 minute maximum. So at this time, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have people coming up. I'll hold on to the mic, and please make your comments, and we'd love to hear from you. Why don't you approach it this time? Oh, actually, did we have a list of people that are speaking? Wonderful.
Yeah, so I have a list of about 9 people that have signed up so far. If you haven't signed up yet, there's another sign-in sheet back there. For some reason, we get through all 9 of these people before the end of the meeting. I'll go grab that second sheet, and we'll continue on.
And I think Balaji will be answering a lot of these questions, but on the same note, we have this panel here that will be helping out as needed. So who did we have first on the list?
So we have Rachel Collins first.
Okay. I'll just stand here and then you can face the crowd.
Oh, okay. You're going to hold it? My name is Rachel Collins. I want to thank ADEQ for coming here today. It's been a long time coming. I rented an office in March of 2022 at Aspen Mini Storage, which became filled with slag particulate very quickly, as well as 2 storage units. I did report it to the city, to MRI, and eventually to ADEQ, and all of those entities told me nothing was happening. But 1 year ago exactly, I started my complaint process with ADEQ, and I never gave up. And I was able to prove in May of 2023 that there were lies that the Tom Herkett, who is the operator and owner of MRI, had made on almost every single permit. ADEQ took it seriously, and they assured me in June, this past June, that they were going to do something about it. In 2 separate conversations I had with ADEQ, and here we are today. So unfortunately, there are victims who've been complaining for 7 years, who've had serious fugitive dust damage that have destroyed their lives, their health, their possessions, and their businesses, like myself. Jay Adams, who owns Combustion Dynamics, he is a Vietnam veteran, and his 2,000 square foot garage has been filled with slag powder for 7 years. He's laying in the VA in La Jolla right now with serious systemic infection from inhaling this for all these years. Another lady who is Dorothy Weisenbach started complaining in 2015. She had to abandon her home, which is just sitting there falling apart, and she's living nearby. Her animals died. She was convinced her pets were contaminated. She got very sick. She's 85. No one has helped any of these victims, and no one's talking about the reality of the health damage and the destruction to the lives of some people. I'm not saying by any stretch everyone's been contaminated, but I hired an environmental consultant in January of 2023. She determined that the PM level was 2.5 and less of what was in my office, on my possessions, and that it was full of heavy metals. And that is what I did communicate to ADEQ, to the city, to MRI, and to my landlords. Nothing has been done so far. I do hope that you take it seriously, because those of us who have lost everything really need help, and those who don't even know if they've been contaminated, for sure need some justice, environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Okay, I didn't hear a question in there, but I may have missed it. It was just a comment. Is that right, Rachel? Okay, thank you so much for that. And Melissa, I believe that you've recorded that, and we will pass along that information to ADHS. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thanks, Rachel. Always good to hear from you, so thank you. Next, we have Derek Pelosari.
My question is, ADEQ, how long does MRI have to comply? And when you find somebody, if somebody is doing something egregious, do you guys give them a 2-year permit to correct all problems and still let them have that conditional where they can still do business and damage? Or how does that process take place?
Balaji?
I can take that. We have a process, so like I mentioned to you before the meeting started, we do a variety of things. We review reports from the company, we inspect the property to identify violations if we happen to see them, and we put them on notice. And when we put them on an informal notice, we generally give them what we believe is a reasonable time frame to get back into compliance. There may be some things which are relatively simple and easy to implement to rectify the act of non-compliance, and we give them like 3 or 5 days to comply. And there may be some others where you got to put a brand new control device, and that may take a couple of months to do. But never in any of our compliance processes will we give somebody 2 years to run unlawfully and not do anything about it. So I think our whole intention of this process, obviously partially also responding to Ms. Collins from before, what has happened before did happen. I'm not trying to make light of it. Definitely it was something that I regret personally. But moving forward, how can we make it right? And I think our whole intention is, can we put them on the right permit as quickly as we can? And in the meantime, are we putting out the most prescriptive consent order possible, which we believe we have done. And obviously, if the infraction ends up being even more significant, there are other avenues we can pursue with respect to more formal enforcement. So it's a step-by-step process for us. Does that answer the question, sir? Okay.
All right, well, thank you for your question. Next, we have Jennifer Richards.
Do you mind if I? Yes.
I'll bring it right to you. No problem. I'll hold it.
Oh, okay, perfect. So since I guess I'm just going to read all of my questions since I have 3 minutes, and then you can address them one by one. But you had mentioned that the air quality control permit that they're getting doesn't look at the arsenic, the barium. There's not exposure levels that are set for those heavy metals. Yet we know that they're toxic. The EPA has put out a document called an issue paper on the health effects of heavy metals, and they go through very specifically how to do a risk assessment when there are multiple metals present that are respirable or ingestible, and how to come up with a threshold that is a safe level of exposure for children. Does ADEQ have any intention to compel this, whether you can do it yourselves or not? Will you compel the risk assessment as outlined in the issue paper to be done, so that the air monitoring you're doing, you're monitoring how much dust is coming off, but if we don't know what threshold children get sick at, that monitoring doesn't necessarily mean too much to me as a mother with a sick child. Can you guarantee us that when you give them their permit, that the amount of fugitive dust they will be allowed to emit under that permit will be safe for exposure to children, both in the moment as well as chronic? So it's been exposure has been happening for 9 years. It's set to happen for 20 more years. So not just a daily exposure, but what happens when a child is exposed to breathing it in every day for a year, for 10 years, for 20 years? What happens when pregnant moms inhale or ingest? How long are you doing monitoring for? Is this temporary, or will this be air monitoring being done the entire time? The slag is compromised, yes, of those heavy metals, but it's predominantly iron oxide, iron silicate, which is very abrasive, very sharp. That's why the product is called Sharp Shot and used to blast for sandblasting. Are you going to look at the effects of that abrasive material in harming the skin, causing rashes on the skin, like my son has received? How that abrasive material can impact and scar the lungs, the fibrosis that can cause in the lungs. So not just the toxicity, but also the actual physical impacts of that. You mentioned that they have been operating for the last 9 years under the inappropriate permit, which is why they have the consent order, essentially meaning that they have never had the right permit for the last 9 years. In part, yes, that's your fault. Thank you for acknowledging that. In part, that's MRI's fault because I provided information that was inaccurate. Will you be enforcing any penalties, fees, violations for the last 9 years of emissions? Will you be compelling any cleanup or testing of the emissions that have already occurred, the people who are already sick? Will you be testing in homes? And will you be requiring that MRI does any remediation for the last 9 years of unlawful, unpermitted emissions into our city? Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lot. Can you just repeat maybe the first one for me?
So the first one was, are you going to do a risk assessment based off of the EPA issue paper on the health effects of metals and the specific combination that they are in the slag dust, and including in that the fact that it's iron oxide and abrasive,
Gotcha.
and how the abrasive nature to open the skin and open the lungs would increase uptake of that?
Gotcha. I don't have a great answer for that. What I'll say is, we are air permitting and air compliance professionals. We are not public health experts by any stretch, but that is where ADHS comes in. So I do not know their process on how they go about doing a risk assessment and a health consultation, but I presume it will not be one of those exercises where we collect data and the data is not purposeful. To your point, we need to have a basis for comparison. All right, and I'm pretty sure that they working with either ATSDR thresholds or EPA risk levels are doing some kind of a comparison. But I'm no expert to speak on that.
Who is doing that? Somebody's doing that right now.
DHS will do it eventually with the air quality data that we produce and we supply to them. The comparison will be made by them between what is measured and what may be acceptable thresholds with ATSDR.
There is no current acceptable threshold for copper slag dust. A new risk assessment would need to be performed. It's a several years of studying to see at what level. There is no copper slag, this is what is determined as the safe level. It would have to be a new risk assessment that would be compelled by ADEQ.
Yeah, you are taking me out of my field of expertise, but I'll say one thing. Instead of talking about the copper slag, the fact that there are these individual heavy metals coming off, like arsenic or lead or manganese, that is what they're going to be after. Because we collect these filters and ship them to the lab, we are going to know exactly how much of these metals are coming off. So that can allow for a reasonable comparison. I know you're talking about even cumulative impacts, like what happens if I get arsenic plus lead. That is not something that I can respond to, but I have a feeling that when they do their study, it involves some level of comparison with some kind of a threshold. Beyond that, I can't speak to what the process entails.
That ADEQ will establish a safe level of exposure to this copper slag dust to children?
I don't have authority for that under our program.
So then the next question was, then I think you answered this. There's no way that ADEQ can offer us any type of assurance that the emissions that will be allowed under the air quality permit they're currently working towards, there's no assurance that that level will actually be safe and not pose a risk to human health.
Oh, that I can give you that, yeah. Because like I mentioned to you, we have direct authority and jurisdiction when we talk about pollutants with the federal standard. When we talk about PM10, PM2.5, and lead, those are criteria pollutants in our program, and we can deny a permit, we can revoke a consent order if we need to, things like that. So we will not be able to put out a permit for public consumption in a few months if we can't document again that the NAAQS is being complied with. So when I put out a permit in a few months, I'm going to be able to say that the PM10, the PM2.5, and the lead coming off this facility beyond the property boundary are protective of human health. What I can tell you is specific things about manganese and arsenic and...
But that's the point. You're going off the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are for native dust. What we're talking about is a copper smelter slag pile, which is not our native dust.
Correct.
And so to apply the same standard to the slag dust as to them bulldozing out by the airport to build the apartments and those emissions, we're talking apples to oranges. If we don't know what level of exposure children get sick at, you can't say that then you know that the emissions coming to our community are safe if you don't know at what level kids get sick.
See, all I'm saying is, within the authority that is given to us by state statutes, those will be tackled explicitly by DEQ as part of the permitting process. There's no question. I know where you're going with the heavy metals. That is where I explained the whole idea that there is the direct authority that ADEQ has with PM10, PM2.5, and lead, and we do not have such authority for the heavy metals. And I regret that, but as a program, we don't have that right now. That is why we are relying on this consultation process with DHS. You follow me? So, two different things. I'm just saying when I just
want to make sure the risk, we have council members in here, we have, city staff members who have that there's a permit they've given them that says this permit cannot be operated that could pose a threat to human health. And they are 100% relying on you and your department to make that determination. And so I guess we're going to hold you to that. You will guarantee us that if you give them their air quality permit, that they meet that our children can't get sick.
I'll tell you this, I will ensure that the permit that we put out applies every element of state and federal law available to us to make the permit as protective as possible. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm telling you, my authority, what I can work with and what I can put in a permit.
Why not do the risk assessment?
Because
why not compel MRI, or why not say you can't operate unless you can prove that the dust you're producing is safe for the children's facilities that's falling off?
But such a request would be unlawful. I know what you mean from a public policy standpoint.
Would that have to be planning and zoning that would put that request in and say, if we're going to issue this permit that says you cannot operate something that can pose a threat to human health, you got to prove to us through doing a risk assessment that your emissions can't harm. Is that planning and zoning's baby then? I
can't speak to any other agency or entity's obligations, but what I can tell you is, we take the law very seriously. We are a law enforcement agency at the end of it all, right? So we got to work with the laws in front of us. Of course, there are valid concerns about toxic exposure, and that is why we are going down this path in good faith to do monitoring. But we are also acknowledging there are limitations with legal authority. And that is where we have to find a way to harmonically work with DHS to get this health consultation. So, I'm not trying to take any credit for this, but we could technically say, hey, we don't have any authority. We're just going to turn a blind eye and look away. That is not what we are doing. We really want to sample, because you guys have been very...
Planning and zoning to have a false sense that, well, if ADEQ says this is okay, then it means it's safe for our children. So if it's not within your authority, that's cool. I got no problems with that at all. But being honest with the city officials who are granting their permits to say, we can't guarantee this is safe for children, we can't guarantee that this blowing into the rec center and the library is safe, you're going to have to figure that out on your own. I guess just being transparent if you can't determine... The
way I'll respond to it is, we are not going to issue an unsafe permit, right? But all that I'm trying to tell you is, my authority is limited to these pollutants in question, right? PM10, 2.5, and lead. And I will do as rigorous of a job as possible. I will build as many permit conditions as I need to. If we need to seek voluntary concessions from MRI to do better things, we will do all that. But I'm just trying to be very upfront and transparent with all of you that there is a bifurcation in authority. When we get to heavy metals, I explained the process, right? So I cannot do unlawful things. Just like you are concerned about MRI doing unlawful things, I cannot make unlawful requests to MRI. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
I understand that.
Okay.
And the final one that I had asked, because you said you're really a law enforcement agency, so they've been operating for 9 years without the legally required permit. What are you going to be doing? You can fine them for every single day that they have emitted. You could fine them $2,000 a day, $700,000 a year, 9 years. You could ensure every speck of this dust is cleaned up out of the community, every home, every vent, every child could get tested their blood level for lead. We could do a lot with that money. Are you going to be enforcing any laws, any of the violations against them?
Let's let Balaji answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is not a question that I can answer in this forum. And the reason for that is our priority right now is to get them fixed right. That's the most important thing. I got to get them the right permit.
Business as usual.
I wouldn't say that, you know.
Keep them running.
No. I think the idea is to let them run, but run the plant in a protective fashion. That's what we are. It's not a bureaucratic thing we are trying to do. Say, you can do whatever you want to do. We don't care. No, that's not that. I'm trying to convey to you that our priorities are getting the right permit done. Our next priority is to do the air sampling. And right from that aspect, you should know that we are serious about this.
You're not addressing the core issues, she's saying. Yeah.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we've heard that question, and we're actually going to move on to the next person. We appreciate that you have those questions, but if you have the questions, we'd like you to come up here and ask those.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yep.
And we'll also be around a little bit after if we want to go back and forth, but just so we can get to everyone.
I appreciate that.
We'll move on to Michaela Swagger. And thank you, Jennifer, for your continued conversations with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak tonight. My name is Michaela, and I'm speaking on behalf of my brother, Mark Small. He was hired to help build the slag pile. He helped run the slag pile for 7 years. He stayed with MRI throughout a lot of sicknesses that he endured. This includes many sinus infections, surgeries, sinus surgeries, bronchitis, heart attacks, hospital stays due to all the above. He took his last breath. It was due to pneumonia from inhaling all this dust particles that he worked with. MRI did nothing to give them protection around their mouth, their nose, or anything like that to keep them from inhaling this stuff. There was a lot of dangerous things that we're finding out that are bad for our health that is coming from this dust. Again, look at the picture. Do you see any protection whatsoever on his face? No. I'm sorry. MRI has continued to be able to operate with what I understand is not good permits. The city of Cottonwood is allowing these criminals to continue to operate in our city. There are petitions circulating around town on this very subject. There are tests that have been done to show the toxicity of this. How many lives are you guys willing to let go? We must start now by stopping the blasting and stop continuing work that is being done on the MRI. Are you waiting for someone you love to lose their life? Or have it changed drastically? Don't wait anymore. Please get involved. Help save lives of our community. You can't save my brother, but you can save other people in our community that mean so much to us. Don't wait till it's your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle. Don't wait. Get involved now. We need to stop them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, for being so brave and telling your story. We really appreciate that. And we're here because we want to hear the comments that you have in your story. So thank you so much. There wasn't a question, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. I didn't hear it. Was there a question that you had?
There was a question
something. We need to think about these people that it has been affecting too. We can't wait any longer.
I think we hear that message. I don't know that there's an answer that we can give right now. But as we've said, these things are being recorded. We are going to work with ADHS on that and look at what is happening in this situation. Thank you, Michaela.
And then, so next we have Patrick. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your last name, McInnes.
We've had a family business in the area since the mid-'80s. We have a business now that's in the shadow of the slag pile for over 30 years. We have many tenants to think about. We have our family business to think about. Our property's coated and covered in slag dust, at times so thick you can see footprints in it. We find this totally unacceptable. There's no circumstance where this is okay. Up to this point, the City of Cottonwood and ADEQ has failed us and failed this community. We need to get this resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, Lauren, who's next?
All right, thank you, Patrick. Next we have Keith Davis.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This is hard to speak about. I've been here 33 years. I live with my mother here. She's 97. The slag is all around our house, on sides of the streets, in the parking lot, everywhere. I know several people that are sick. Some have died. These are damages, real damages, not to be hidden behind numbers. It comes down to, I can't keep my train of thought. It comes down to a situation where are we going to allow the people who caused the damages to walk away unscathed and hide behind numbers? Are they going to need to be sued before they feel the pain that we feel? Do they need to be stopped forcibly by law? This is not something that we can think is something we can permit. You can't permit damages. You cannot make a law that allows you to damage somebody. Doesn't exist. If you are willing to make the reparations of what ADEQ has allowed for years, people's houses, people's health, people's business has been permanently damaged. And this is not a local problem. This is larger than this city. This powder is going all over the world as abrasives. This is an international crisis. What are you going to do? This is not something we can just talk about. This needs immediate action. We can't just think, oh, it'll go away if we ignore it, like some people I've seen in the government. It's just dust, they say. How arrogant of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I think that kind of goes towards the comment that Michaela was making about what are we going to do, and we're taking this into consideration and we'll continue to work on it.
Yes, thank you, Keith. We appreciate it. And next we have Shada Sina.
My name is Dr. Shada Sina. I'm a naturopathic physician here in Cottonwood. Earlier in the summer, I was given some dust to test, and I ran it through doctors' data laboratory. The dust was filled with heavy metals, aluminum being the highest, but not considered a toxicant. I understand that Arizona ADEQ is responsible for not only testing PM 2.5, 10, and lead, but also carbon monoxide, ozone, and sulfur. Sulfur is a big thought on my head because much of the, smelting had sulfur. We are having a lot of irritation to lungs, which is possibly due to sulfur. So are you going to test for that? MRI originally did leach studies that showed hexavalent chromium. No, they didn't test for that, but it was high in chromium and barium. Will they test for hexavalent chromium, which is a carcinogen? Are you going to have them do leach studies again? What is their phase 2 environmental studies really going to be, and will it be adequate for us? And what about who's testing the soil? People are having gardens, and Clarkdale had to have full-on restoration of their yards. What about the dust polluting everybody's yard where they're growing their cucumbers and tomatoes because food is so expensive? I think that might be a good place for me to stop.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Sina, I'll take your first question. That I remember that really well with respect to what we will monitor for. Like I mentioned to you before the meeting, at this time, our intention is to monitor for PM10 and for all the heavy metals that the sampling technique will allow us to measure for. That is the plan right now. And the reason for not measuring some of the other pollutants that you mentioned, like carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide, is because when you look at their emission profile with respect to what is expected to come from the MRI operation, those pollutants have extremely minimal emissions. So typically when we undertake a monitoring study, we try to be very pinpoint because we are trying to identify the pollutants of concern. And for us at this time, the pollutants of concern from MRI is primarily dust and any heavy metals the dust carries. So that's where we are starting. Of course, if the monitoring happens and we find results that appear to indicate a massive problem, we are measuring concentrations much higher than we expected, that may open the doors for other considerations. Possibly soil. I mentioned it to you before. We've had some very high-level discussions with our waste programs division, and we are willing to go there, but we got to start somewhere. And when we talk about this in the context of the air quality issues and the air quality permit and the air quality consent order, we are choosing to start with what we know are very real concerns from the community. That is PM10 and the metals. So that's what is going to happen first. So what was your second question?
Hexavalent chromium, it was never differentiated when chromium came up on the studies. That's a real concern.
It may be a legit concern, but not a relevant concern to the air permitting process. And again, I'm not trying to hide behind this whole silo thing that, I do air, so I can only, but I'm genuinely, that may be somewhat of a waste program concern. I'm not no expert on that, but I can certainly take the question back that Melissa writes down and we can talk to them, but it's certainly not us. Okay? Any other questions? I don't know. Is it part of the air? It's not part of the air permit obligation.
It is part of their agreement with, I believe, the city of Cottonwood, right?
For the conditional use permit?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't speak to that. That's between the city and the company. And we have no direct purview from an air quality standpoint on that study. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you. Nice to meet you, Dr. Sina. We appreciate the conversations that have been going back and forth with you as well. Next, we have Milt Kramer, sorry.
Not a problem. Balaji, first I want to thank you.
Thank you, sir.
What a great presentation.
Thank you.
And I know that I'm not going to get an answer here because you've already addressed it. My first question is, what is the quantity of heavy metal ingested either through eating it or breathing it that causes cancer? I know you've sat down and said 0.004 of a ton is all that's emitted per year. And that seems like just a small amount. But when you think of fentanyl as an example, that could kill 1,000 people easily. I'm trying to find out what that quantity is and how much of that is actually in the dust that I'm breathing over there at the VFW. And I know you're going to answer the question when you get to an expert that can do that. Another one that I had is, how long does it take for the heavy metals to flush out of your body? Never. Thank you. That's what I thought. I read that too. And then when you do your inspections, are they random and unannounced? They always are, because I've noticed that on occasion they shut down their operation.
And we would not know, and
they
we would show up.
Increase
right.
the amount of water that they're spreading up there. And as far as the amount of stuff coming across that imaginary line, I went out there one morning after a weekend and swept up the back porch of the VFW. I filled up 2/3 of a 5-gallon bucket of that dust. Well, during that time, of course, I'm breathing it in. After less than an hour, you blow your nose into your handkerchief, and it is black as sin. And you know you're getting it into you, and that's my concern. Not just for me, but for everybody in this town. The closer you are, the worse it is.
And that concern is very concerning to us. And that's why we go down this path. You know, not just from a permit standpoint and talking about inspections. We want to measure. We want to know what is truly happening. Now, obviously, we hear concerns, you know, the stuff about you scooping up stuff from the ground, or people falling sick, or these containers being contaminated. But we got to see what's truly happening, right? So that's why we are measuring there. And hopefully, this is somewhat comforting. The location that we are monitoring at are what we call sensitive population receptors. Older people, you know, our veterans who we are so thankful for, and our kids. That's where we want to measure. So hopefully something good comes out of it in terms of good data for us from the monitoring exercise, and hopefully we can do a robust consultation with DHS. Okay. That's the plan. Yeah.
Well, and I understand your 25, your 10 are your measurements, but what that young lady said there is the most important thing, the heavy metals. And I know you have,
I can't deny that. Yeah.
I know you have no control over it.
Yeah. Thank you for your comment, Milt, and your questions. Okay, it looks like the next person that we have is Kathy Ransom.
I want to thank ADEQ for admitting your errors and omissions on this. I have lived here in Cottonwood for over 20 years now, and I raised my daughter here. I can see the slag pile. We've been watching the 4th of July fireworks from our front porch all these years. The fireworks are set off on the slag pile, as everyone who lives here knows. I live southwest of the pile, and one of my questions is, can monitoring equipment be positioned south and west? You are currently east and north of the pile. The wind in this valley is crazy, and if we are only monitoring in 2 directions, you're not going to get the whole story. Go Cottonwood wind, right? Also, can samples be taken from the slag pile at different time intervals and different locations? Because if the bad stuff, and yes, we're talking about heavy metals, and we don't want that in the dust, this pile was developed over a period of years, many years is my understanding. I think Dr. Sina knows exactly how long it is. But there are different things throughout different areas of this pile. And if we can identify one particular area, for example, wouldn't that be awesome, that was super nasty, and just say, don't crush this. That would be a partial solution, perhaps. So is ADEQ going to be sampling the pile at all before it gets crushed? And finally, what about runoff to our dear Verde River? Because the water that they use to hold down the dust runs down the pile, it's lying on the ground, and then it's washed away by the rain that we wish we got more of. So what about the Verde River?
So I think there were 3 questions there, 3 or 4, Kathy, is that right? So we might need you to reiterate those for us. Thank you so much. Do you remember the first one, Balaji?
I don't.
Okay, what was the first question, if you can reiterate that?
Can equipment be placed more than east and north of the pile to monitor?
That's very much a possibility. Where we are starting right now is obviously the 2 locations, because we believe, based on our computer modeling, that we believe the highest impacts will happen at these 2 locations, and also happens to have the people who may be the most sensitive to these impacts. So we are starting there, but we are not saying that we are ending there. No. Depending on what we find there, we may be open to the possibility of monitoring down south, the fairgrounds or wherever, or other locations possibly too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you had other questions, but thank you for the ideas about mitigation. We really appreciate that. Go ahead, Kathy. What was the second one?
Can samples be taken from the pile at different time intervals and different locations to try to identify in advance the nastiest stuff in that pile before it gets crushed?
That is a fascinating thought, which we had not thought of before. So I certainly give you a lot of credit for that idea. Right now, the company samples the pile on a regular basis. They're required by their vendors. I see some people kind of, not being terribly happy with that, but they are required to provide such sampling reports to the ultimate customers they sell the product to. So there is a commercial reason for that. And so we certainly have copies of all those sampling reports. And generally speaking, I don't know if they're scooping from the same place all the time, but the numbers are generally comparable. So meaning the distribution is somewhat consistent across the pile. But that's an interesting idea, because if you identify a small batch within the bigger pile that's more problematic, maybe there's an agreement to be made with the company. But a lot of what is going to happen on this front is going to be dictated by the air monitoring and the health assessment. Clearly, if we get to a situation where we truly document that the emissions from this facility, the impacts from the facility could be problematic, it opens up the doors for many different conversations, one of them being that. So thank you for that.
And the last question was about what about runoff to the Verde River?
Yeah, that's out of my domain on air permitting, but I'm going to see whether David Kim with our water quality division can take a crack at this.
Thank you, David, for coming up.
So in regards to the surface water, so I'm groundwater with more in reuse, but the surface water people have told me that their latest inspection was back in October 25th of this year, and they found some minor paperwork violations. But in regards to runoff to the Verde River, there's no concerns there.
And Dave, could we make the inspection report available to them?
Yeah. And I'll send copies of the inspection reports and the NOC that came from the inspection made available to the public. So.
Is heavy metal monitored in the Verde River?
There's certain concentrations, but I'd have to see exactly what is being measured. But we can look. I can take that back and get that information to you.
I think the conversation about water is something that is just beginning, and so that may be why we don't have the data to answer those questions at this time. But I think it's something that we're definitely watching towards the future. Caroline, did you have something you wanted that recorded? Is that what you were saying?
If there's something that we want to make sure we address all the questions, so if you just want to put your question on a comment card, and we will follow up with the people that have.
Great reminder that we have the comment cards. I don't know if people have grabbed them, but if you'll please write those down, or we have those QR codes that you can also use to make comment from 6 o'clock tonight until 6 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah, and Kathy, always feel free to send me an email. We have a ton of great surface water dashboards and interactive tools where you can check a lot of the surface waters in Arizona and check if they're impaired at this point for anything. And recent sampling, we have a lot of amazing volunteers throughout Arizona that also help us with our sampling for our surface waters as well. So that data is available to the public, and I can send you those links.
Thank you for the reminder on that. We actually have a science and education representative that is always looking for people to volunteer to monitor water. So if anybody is interested in that or more information about that, I have cards. Please come up to me after. I'd be glad to give you one, and we'd be happy to have your help. So, okay, Lauren, who is next?
And then I have one more written question here. I didn't see anyone drop any comment cards in the box yet, so I'm going to read these 2 questions here for Balaji, and then we have a handful of questions that people have asked online that City Manager Scotty Douglas will share on the screen after this question.
Great.
This was a 2-parter, Balaji. So the first one is that you mentioned that there is no standard for heavy metals for the general public, and you cannot enforce lead. Is this correct?
The first part is correct. You know, with respect to the heavy metals, except lead. Lead is one pollutant which is also considered what is called a criteria pollutant, and there is a standard for it. But all the other ones, you're absolutely correct. That's what I said. Yes.
And then the second part is OSHA has strong laws and procedures for employers for lead and other heavy metals. Who protects the general public if EPA has no safe standards?
We do, within the purview of what we have in front of us. Now, at least when you talk about lead, we do have standards, and we are going to ensure that the public is suitably protected. But the question is still about the other metals, and I will directly concede that we don't have authority for that. So that's where the consultation goes in, and maybe that leads to some other solutions for us.
Okay, so we had some questions that were online. Are we pulling those up, Scotty? Great, I'll read those off. All right. From Beverly Hedden, with the various slag piles throughout Arizona, have there been any similar problems posed by other communities?
I think there is the Dewey Humboldt situation, thank you, was one that happened, also from historical operations, and I believe that is an active Superfund site, unless I'm mistaken. There's some cleanup going on there. So yeah, at least that's one side.
We're getting some nods from your panel over here.
Yeah, is that right, Craig? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Next question from David Soul. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, David. For modeling, what does ADEQ use as the amount of lead in the slag? Has ADEQ done its own sampling and analysis of the slag, or is it trusting RMI? I'm sorry, am I getting it right? Wrong?
MRI.
MRI. I'm sorry, it was misprinted here. MRI, to tell the truth about what is in the slag. It's crucial that ADEQ take their own samples and get their own analysis for the public to trust the results. Wouldn't you agree? And I can restate those questions if you need.
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, you can see it in front of you. Yeah. Great. Sorry.
So I will answer the question. It is a fair question and a fair suggestion, and we may consider doing that as part of our whole air sampling effort. Scooping up slag from the facility and sampling it, that's not a difficult task. So we could do that. But as of now, we are taking the data from the company. And the analysis of slag by the company, I believe, is done through a third-party entity. It's not something that the company just makes up. You know, they scoop, they analyze, they send it to a lab and get the results. And we have read through the protocol in how this process is conducted. So you are absolutely correct. For now, we accept the results as they come from the company, but absolutely, as a possibility, we could sample on our own as well.
Okay, excellent. I think we got everything in that question, right, Balaji?
I believe I got that one, yes.
Okay, excellent. Again, from David, it looks like, has ADEQ considered taking soil samples at the playground and the VFW? I think the answer to that is yes, and that's going to be happening, right? Or is it's the air quality monitor?
We are open to
it's
considering
not soil
it. It's
samples.
Just air monitoring for the time being. But potentially, based on what kind of results we get from the air monitoring, it could lead down this process of more sampling and possibly soil sampling.
Okay. And then that would be good to ascertain what present lead exposure levels are. How else can you know what the impact is? So maybe we already covered that, or is there more?
Let me read the question, please.
Yeah, he's just asking how would we ascertain what the impact is?
Well, so the way we do modeling is we take the emissions that we are expecting to come from the MRI property, and we run it through the model. And if you remember that slide, and I can even, if I need to go back, I can, you get a modeled concentration of lead, and then we assume a nominal concentration of lead in that area, that's the background, and that's what is taken into account. So it is a combination concept. You take both the background and the modeled impacts, and you need to be below the federal standard for you to be able to proceed forward. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Next question. MRI. Oh, I'm sorry. Ursula Conway. MRI has been cited twice in 2023 for leaky processing equipment. Why should we trust them to continue operations on the consent permit?
The reason for that is because we are out there on a very consistent basis. Rob Burville, our inspector, has been out there multiple different times since we have issued the consent order. And that's a fundamental principle for ADEQ. When we issue either a permit or in this case a consent order, we don't take the company's actions for granted. Obviously, there is an obligation for them to submit reports to us. That is part of their self-monitoring and self-policing aspect of the program. And we evaluate those, but we actually step foot on the property unannounced. So they don't get any heads up that we are coming. Rob just shows up, he will do a full inspection, and we cite them if we find problems. So at least thus far, based on what we have seen in terms of the company's behavior, since the consent order was issued, we have no reason to believe that they are violating the consent order.
Okay, next question is, when is MRI's dust control plan due?
I believe we already have it. Is that correct, Gene? We have the plan. Yeah, so the plan was submitted, I believe, on the same date that the application was due, back on October 31st. So we have it in our possession and we've reviewed it.
Okay, thank you. And then it looks like this is the last couple of questions, at least on Zoom. How are background concentrations measured? How can you find uncontaminated samples?
That's an absolutely fantastic question, right? So background concentrations can be a tricky topic, right? Sometimes maybe in some very minimal instances, we may have some air monitors in a certain area, which we've been measuring pollution for a very, very long time. So it gives you a really, really precise sense on what is happening in that area. So you could use the data as background when a new industrial facility pops up. But in most other situations, that is not a reality, because we don't sample in every single location across the state. So what happens is we take the activities in the nearby vicinity of the facility, and we take into account other similar areas elsewhere in the state which may have comparable activities, and we make a very precise engineering judgment on, okay, we don't have a monitor right next to MRI or in the Cottonwood area for a certain pollutant, but perhaps there is another monitor elsewhere, maybe in Tucson, that would fit the box. So we may choose that value to use as a background. I hope that helps. And that is a legitimate question and something that we put a lot of thought into.
Okay, and I was mistaken. There are a few more questions, so I apologize. Blasting does not occur daily. How do you measure dispersion when they are not blasting? Question one. And then, does the intermittent processing cause the measurable heavy metals to be minor sources of pollutants, as opposed to continuous processing?
I don't think I fully understand the question, but I'll take a crack at this. Yeah, blasting does not occur daily, but when we do the mathematically simulated model, we are assuming that it happens on a daily basis, right? So when we think about a worst case emission configuration, we think that everything is happening at the same time. They are blasting, they are doing primary crushing with a third-party company, and they're also doing all of the subsequent processing with a secondary crushing circuit. That is the whole idea. We model for what we call a worst-case scenario with worst-case meteorological conditions happening. And only when those two kind of come together and you still have an exceedance, we have a problem. So that's how it's taken into account. I don't understand the second question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I did either. Does the intermittent processing cause the measurable heavy metals to be minor sources of pollutants?
Is she referring to the blasting as being intermittent?
Yeah, I believe that that's what she's asking.
I don't believe so, because I mean, you're measuring everything at that point. So I don't think it's going to dilute the result in any way, because you're contemplating there is dust coming off the different operations, including the secondary crushing circuit with all the heavy metals, the primary crushing circuit, and then the blasting. So I don't think there is any concept of dilution. All we are doing is we are being comprehensive, and that scenario may not play out very many times in a year, because they don't blast very many times. I think they blast about 10 times a year, I think. And they probably do this crushing, the primary crushing, maybe 10 times a year. So they are not usually part of the plant.
No. They do that on a daily basis.
Which one?
Or it's
consistently is what you're saying.
Just to be clear though, I just want to be careful in how I phrase this. There is the primary crushing, sir, which is done not by the MRI people, but there is a third-party company. It's Superstition Crushing. They come in and crush the material periodically, and they pilot, like Jen was talking about, and then MRI processes it. But that operation is not an everyday activity. But the one operation that you're probably imagining is the one closest to the fence line, very close to the VFW operation. That happens a lot more often on a daily basis. But the blasting, the primary crushing are somewhat periodic.
Okay. The World Health Organization, this is from Beverly Hedden again. The World Health Organization has standards for heavy metals. Could you not use their standards, I think is what they're asking.
I honestly can't respond to the question, Justin, because that takes me out of our regulations, our purview. And I think this is a question maybe better suited for DHS.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. If we can get that recorded, Melissa, thank you. I know that you're doing that at the back. Thank you so much. Can you tell us, this is from Ursula again, can you tell us how the new dust control plan differs from their earlier operations?
I hate to put Jean on the spot. But Jean, are you able to help me with this question with respect to the dust control plan that was submitted? Because I believe they never had a dust control plan before. Would that be correct? Okay. So this dust control plan is a plan that we've established for the company through the consent order for the very first time. And it'll be a concept that we'll carry forward to the new permit. So when I read this question, different from their earlier operations, it's just going to be more prescriptive, because we are going to ensure a lot more inspections, a lot more daily housekeeping. The whole point is, if you take care of your leaks when they happen quickly, you take care of stuff that's lying on the ground quickly, that is going to minimize opportunities for stuff to get blown off from the property. That's the whole objective of the dust control plan. So all that I can say is, it is different from the old operations because these are new requirements and presumably much more rigorous than what they have done before. So I'm expecting there is a payoff for us in terms of better controlled operations and lower emissions from the property.
Okay. Were there any further questions, Scotty? I said there weren't before, and then I was wrong.
Melissa's got something.
Yes, Melissa, please bring those forward. Thank you so much, and I'll read those off. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. All right. So this is from Dr. Sina, I believe. What metals will you be testing for, and is, I'm sorry, is it quantitation? Is there quantitation? Is that what you're asking?
So are you asking if we'll quantify those? Yeah, absolutely, from a concentration standpoint. That is the whole idea. We measure every one of them shipped off to the lab. But with respect to what we will measure, Craig, are you able to help me out, please?
We're utilizing EPA IO method 3.5.
You want to come up to the mic?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Yeah.
Utilizing EPA method IO 3.5, which includes aluminum, antimony, arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, chromium, not chrome 6. There's a difference. Cobalt, copper, lead, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, selenium, thallium, thorium, uranium, vanadium, zinc, barium, and silver.
Thank you, Craig, for that information. Appreciate it. Do we have more? Okay. All right. Who is paying for air monitoring, taxpayers or MRI?
ADEQ is with taxpayer money. Yes. MRI is not paying for it. They have no involvement in the project.
There's
permit money, sorry. Thank you. It's not taxpayer money. It's money that we collect from our sources as fees, and that's the money that's being used. But there is no MRI involvement. MRI is not part of this monitoring exercise. It's independently being run by ADEQ. And they have no say in how long we monitor, where we monitor, any of that stuff. It's an out-and-out ADEQ monitoring effort.
But to clarify, it is through permitting dollars, is that right?
It is through permitting dollars. Yeah, I was incorrect in what I said, because we have two different funds kind of funding our program. There's, most of our funding comes from permitting fees, then we charge companies for emissions and our activities, and then there's a small portion of that comes from taxpayer funds. And I was mistaken.
And I think we had a follow-up question over here.
Okay.
I thought you said there was an outside company doing their monitoring.
No, that was different. I was talking about the testing. When the company has to comply with the testing obligation under the permit, they would hire a third-party company to do the test, and we would supervise it. But with the air sampling, it is going to be an ADEQ effort, and we will ship it to a lab that is a third-party lab to get the results. But we are conducting the monitoring. Yeah.
How much does a permit cost?
Depends, we bill by the hour. So for every hour of labor that the permit writer puts in, we charge approximately $180 per hour. So depending on the level of complexity, you can talk about maybe $10,000. There have been permits that we have charged companies $100,000 to. It's a spectrum.
How long of testing do you have at these sites? Like, how long will you be at VFW? How long will you be at the bar?
Yeah, we are still working out those exact, logistics, but it won't be like a one-day kind of a deal. It'll be multiple weeks. And I think one of the questions that Jen asked before, and maybe I didn't respond to that, is the monitoring is not permanent. So I just want to be clear, I don't think I responded to you earlier, but it will be for several weeks, because, for us to have a comfort level that we are truly collecting representative data from the plant, we got to be out there for a while so that we catch every possible scenario. Maybe they blast, maybe they do some primary crushing, maybe the equipment are operating at full capacity at some point. We need all of those variables to be covered. That way we have a meaningful data set to be able to pass on to the folks from DHS to do the analysis. It won't be a single day or a single week. It'll be multiple weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Question from Lisa Ellers over here. So the question was the height of the... Oh, okay. All right.
So I've just noticed I live just a few blocks away from the pile, and I've noticed the height is like half as high as it was 2 months ago. I'm wondering if that's because you had asked so that the air quality goes up further. It is half the height as it was. I'm taking pictures.
Yeah. I wish I could take credit, but no, we did not do that. We didn't ask them to.
So I didn't know if there was a certain height.
Maybe they are just leveling off and trying to spread the slag pile around so that they can tackle it more easily from a blasting standpoint. But we certainly did not direct them to drop the pile height.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rachel, you had a clarification?
I can answer that. I don't think it's coincidental. I met with ADEQ on August 10th in Clarkdale at the Clarkdale Soil Remediation event. I called an emergency complaint in to ADEQ right before that. And I met with Rob Verville, one of his colleagues, and I was slapping the permits down that are none of which have accurate information in them for MRI in front of him. And this is months after I complained to ADEQ, and they had said, thank you for telling us, Rachel, you're right. They don't have the right permits. This is not the right information. It's metallic material, not gypsum like the permit said. And the day after I did that, they started working on bringing down the pile. So I don't know, and they did it fast. But I did tell him I had the media out there. I told him, we have now we're getting national exposure to this. I just did an interview last week with a doctor that has 50,000 people on his podcast. That podcast is coming out in a few days. We are asking for national help on this issue. And as soon as I said that to them, interesting. I think somebody called MRI because the pile started coming down.
Thank you for that.
But I'm just being upfront with you. We don't have the ability to dictate to MRI what their slag pile height needs to be. No. Yeah. No. Yes, sir.
All right.
Third-party crushing company, do they operate under MRI's permit, or do they have their own?
That's a great question. They operate under MRI's permit because there is a scenario built into the MRI permit that requires them to operate a certain way. So the company that comes in is bound by the same requirements. And of course, if the company out there is violating MRI's portion of the permit as it applies to them, MRI would still be liable because at the end of the day, it's MRI's plant and they take responsibility for everything that happens out there. Yeah.
They had a permit for years, so they couldn't violate anything.
No, I'm talking about it in the context of the consent order, sir. Yeah.
You know, I mean, they had a permit for gypsum? Come on. Gypsum is organic almost.
I'm not denying that. All I'm trying to respond to him is the fact that the scenario for the crushing, when we talk about the consent order, it's a built-in scenario for that crushing. So the company that comes in has to use that permit.
Okay, last question from Rachel Collins. I'm not saying it's the last question of the night, but the last question that we have on the cards here is blasting damage in the community must be addressed. So is the question how blasting damage is going to be addressed in the community?
Well, the thousands of hours that I investigated this, I found many homeowners that had foundations shifted, had cracks in the walls. The inspector for the city, Cody, was in my office doing an inspection in my office in August of 22 when they blasted and the glass broke in my bookcase and the entire building at 751 Aspen shook. So I started asking in the community, does anyone else have damage? And I found people pretty far away have damage. And I had a meeting with the city about it, and I was told by Scott Ellis and James Bramble that we will never address that. Well, really the homeowners are supposed to suck up the damage to their homes from dynamiting at the pile? Does that make sense? There's been no disclosure to anyone about the property damage they may have if they live in this area.
Okay. So I don't know if we have the answer to that. I think that would be something that may go to the city, and it sounds like you've asked the question. Maybe it's something for further conversations with the city.
But the city devotes all the liability to ADEQ, and ADEQ does the reloads.
So I don't want to comment. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. I think what they're implying is when we talk about environmental issues and air quality issues, they certainly have to defer to us because we are the ones working with the company to give them the legal coverage. We are the ones inspecting them. So I think that's where they're coming from. But I certainly cannot talk about this other topic because it's not directly a topic under our purview from an air permitting standpoint.
Okay, I think we have kind of reached the end of the questions. We have about 3 to 4 minutes left. Jen, would you like to ask one more question?
I have one question about the lead.
Yeah.
So I'm on the, you said that lead is something that you monitor. So I'm on the CDC's website right now, and it says this is, what are US standards for lead levels, CDC, and it says that no blood lead threshold for adverse health effects has ever been identified in children, and no blood level above 0 is free from all risk, which means any lead in the blood of children through respiration, through ingestion, through touching or interacting with the slag dust is safe. Is that reflective of what you are going to be using in your standards, or is what the CDC site that says that there is 0 risk that if there's any lead, you're at risk?
See, that's a very tricky question. You're not asking it as a trick question. But the thing is, when we talk about our permit or rules, we are working with the ambient exposure standards, which are all inhalation driven, right? So that's why we have this number. I think it's 0.015 microgram per meter cube on a 0.15, sorry, is it 0.15? 0.15 microgram per meter cube on a 3-month basis. So essentially what the EPA is saying that you could be exposed to that concentration, below that concentration for a 3-month span, and presumably that is protective of public health. So the reason your question is difficult for me is you're talking about blood level concentrations that take into account multiple pathways of exposure. And my purview in this setting is strictly air emissions and inhalation exposure. And for us to work with that, we have to go with the next.
But once it falls out of the air, it falls on the ground. It's not that they're touching it, they're eating it, they're rubbing their eyes, they're eating their oranges, they're picking their noses.
I'm not denying any of those possibilities. All that I'm saying is when I operate within the structure of my rules, we work with air impacts, and we try to ensure that the air impacts are protective of human health. You raise a valid point, and maybe that's where I think the secondary plans we have based on how the air sampling goes may be instructive. Maybe we see elevated air concentration that makes us think a little bit more and maybe want to look at other forms of monitoring. We can go there. But I'm saying from a pure air permitting decision standpoint, blood level concepts, from the CDC, we can apply directly in our permit. I can't say that number somehow trumps an EPA standard that we work with, and that number needs to be 0. I just don't have the legal authority for that.
Okay, thank you, Balaji. We are going to come to the close of the meeting here. We're going to have some closing remarks from Heather Krause, and thank you so much, Heather, for doing that. And then I'm going to do a quick wrap up. And as we did want to do one reminder, and that is to take the fact sheet that is at the back. There's one more question. I apologize. I didn't see that was there. Okay, so we have one more question, Balaji, and that is, has MRI got any bonds for cleanup? Who cleans up the lead?
The first part of it I certainly cannot answer because I do not know if they got any bonds in place. The second question I don't fully follow. Who cleans up the lead? As in lead contamination in the soil?
Who's the insurance company that's bonding MLI?
The insurance company?
Yeah, you need to know that guy.
I don't know who they are.
We need to know that guy. Can we get that guy?
That's who would get sued.
Well, because they get sued because they're the people who are holding the bag.
Yeah, so again, I don't want to appear like I'm trying to avoid your question, but this is not an air quality question with respect to how MRI can cover a liability.
Can you get that information?
We could try. We could ask the company if they're willing to share with us. I guess we could.
The community needs all your help.
And we are here to support that. I want to make it abundantly clear,
MLI is not the poisonous in any level. They call it dust. It doesn't exist.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the conversation tonight. This is not the last time we're going to be here. We will continue to communicate with you. We appreciate you sharing with us the issues that are in the community, and we're going to continue to listen. So I want to thank you all for the civility in this room tonight. Thank you for the questions that you've asked. Balaji, thank you for answering. Thank you for the presentation. We wanted to remind you that we do have the fact sheets at the back, and you can continue to make comments, and we would really appreciate those. Heather, if you could give us some closing remarks.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Justin. So in closing tonight's meeting, please know that we value your time, your comments, and your concerns. And we hope that this meeting has helped to demonstrate ADEQ's commitment to doing air quality monitoring near the facility. So I noted some themes from tonight. I noticed that we had a lot of fugitive dust concerns, health concerns, questions about the risk assessment and enforcement inquiries, air monitoring study questions, sampling of the pile, the Verde River, and even soil samples. So I just wanted everyone to know to please be assured that we're going to get questions or take these questions back and get answers for you, hopefully here in the near future. So thank you again for your time, and I hope you have safe travels. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all for coming, and have a great night.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And we've been in touch. I know you write to me a lot, and I've not responded to every one of your emails.